Good afternoon, everyone. This is Molly Young from the Miami University Alumni Association. In preparation for today's webinar, Dr. Wanko has asked you to log on to menti.com, MENTI.com, and use the banner or the code on the banner at the bottom of the screen, 866841, to take a brief poll. You can use your phone to do this so that it's not necessary for you to open a new tab. Today, we are proud to feature the webinar, The History and Future of Crossword Puzzles. Your instructor today is Dr. Jeffrey Wanko. Dr. Wanko is an associate provost and professor of mathematics education at Miami University. He is also the author of 2 books and numerous articles on using logic puzzles to help students develop their deductive and inductive reasoning skills. Some of his special interests include problem solving, number theory, geometry, and the history of mathematics. We are grateful to have Dr. Wanko with us today and for taking the time to join us. Questions were collected during the registration process, and Dr. Wanko will address some of those throughout the webinar today. Please note that we may not have time to get to every question, but we will certainly try. You'll also have the option to ask a question and/or comment during the webinar by clicking the Ask a Question button. Today's webinar will last about an hour, including time for questions and answers. Again, Dr. Wanko has asked you to log on to menti.com and use the code on the banner at the bottom of the screen, 866841, to take a brief poll. Again, you can use your phone to do this so that it is not necessary for you to open a new tab. And with that, I will turn it over to Jeff with the results and the webinar.
All right, great. Thank you, Molly. I really appreciate that. Thank you for the introduction. So we are pulling up some information here. So this is live data that we're getting as people are responding here. So you can see from the people who have logged in so far, we can put this on percentages if people really prefer those. So we have some people who are crossword fans. About 42% of the people so far who've responded say they do crossword puzzles pretty much just about every day. And for some people, crosswords are just an occasional diversion that you might do. You might pick up the paper when you're somewhere sitting, waiting in the doctor's office, although I think they've taken all those magazines and things out these days. You might also do some of the puzzles when you see them on an airplane. Again, not too many of us are doing that kind of thing right now, but that's all right. There are puzzles everywhere that we can find. So right now, the responses are coming in. You can see what people are saying about their work. I do appreciate that some people have actually said that they consider themselves almost professional cruciverbalists. So those cruciverbalists, just for a quick note about that word, you can see that you break this down, you take a look at the word cruce, the prefix there, that means cross, and verbalist is for words. So these are crossword people, all right? And you can take a look at the second poll that we have here as well. I asked for people just to take a look at some of these puzzles beforehand, and I'm really glad to know that many of you had a chance to do some of that ahead of time. We've had a number of people who have done several of the puzzles, who have done almost the whole packet in some cases, so that's really pretty exciting. So that helps me to know a little bit before we get started here what we're looking at as far as what people have been able to do. So we'll go back and take a look and see where we are. Awesome. Somebody says, what is a crossword puzzle? I think that's a great way for us to get started here for today. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing that screen, and then we're going to go on back and get ready for the presentation. So if you'll give me just a quick moment, I can take care of that. So I really appreciate your logging in here today. We're looking forward to having this conversation. I'm excited about sharing some of my work with you and about getting into some of the stuff that I do a little bit for part of my research. I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit, but we'll also share with you some of my own experiences and diversions. So I was really excited to see the people who have registered for the workshop. I found out right before we started, we had 231 people who have registered. So people are logging in, and some people are going to watch this a little bit later. Really appreciate that. I've seen a number of people listed who I know, And I thought it'd be interesting for you to see a little bit about some of my background with Miami and how I might know some of you. So some of you I know from my days with the Miami Marching Band. So I played in the band for 4 years. This is the percussion section from my freshman year. You can see in the back, find the guy with the headband on. That's not me, but the guy to the left of there who is just peeking over his shoulder, that was me for my freshman year at Miami. Some of you I also know from my days singing with the Glee Club. So I sang as an undergrad in the Glee Club, and I also sang as a faculty member for another 10 years after that. So some of you I know from Glee Club days, might even be with the Alumni Glee Club that you see here featured a few years ago. I also know some of you from my time as a teacher. I was formerly a middle school math teacher, and I also then have been teaching here at Miami for 20 years. Been on faculty here. I taught a number of math education courses. And I've also had the opportunity to teach a number of people in some puzzle courses. So I have developed and taught a course on designing and solving language-independent logic puzzles. I called the course Beyond Sudoku. So this is me working with some students in that course and talking about some of the other puzzles that we were doing there. And finally, some of you I've gotten to know since I've started working in the provost's office. So for the past 3 years, I've served as an associate provost here at Miami. And this is not a sign from my actual office, but a sign that my family and I found a couple years ago in Charleston. So I had to take my picture next to it. But I have worked as a provost here in the department or in the Office of Academic Affairs. And I get to do a lot of work with departments and units across the campus. So this has been a really great opportunity for me. I've gotten to know Miami in a lot of different ways. So my background with puzzles really started back in about 3rd grade. I got really interested in doing puzzles and solving puzzles. And for me, it was about creating puzzles. I remember creating puzzles for Mrs. Over, my 3rd grade teacher. And we would, I would make a puzzle, like a word search puzzle. We were looking for everybody's names in the class. And I just thought that was really a lot of fun. What's funny is never anything that a teacher asked me to do. So I did it anyway. And I don't know how much they appreciated it, but I had fun doing that. Around 4th grade, then I picked up my first book to take a look at some harder puzzles. So Martin Gardner, one of his books, really introduced me to a lot of the advanced puzzles in terms of puns and logic and things like that, and just got me started down that path. So since then, I've been a subscriber to Games Magazine. Actually, I subscribed when it started, a year after it started. In 1978, I subscribed to that magazine, and I still get it today. So still make sure to get those when they come out. When I started working here at Miami, one of the things that really got me interested in working with students was to see how students were developing their own logic and reasoning. So a lot of the work that I did then and have continued over the years has been around the students' development of their deductive and their inductive reasoning using logic puzzles. So Sudoku is an example of a logic puzzle. It's a language-independent type puzzle where you don't have to know the language or the culture for a puzzle. So I've been able to do some research on students' development of those ideas, and that's really led me to a lot of the work that I have been publishing since then. I was actually doing a workshop at Miami's Winter College. It was back in 2016 on logic puzzles, and I had a lot of people come up to me after my talk and say, "That was really fun. I love to learn about these puzzles, but do you ever do crossword puzzles?" And I said, "Well, I do crossword puzzles. I enjoy crossword puzzles, and I've just kind of kept that in the back of my mind." And so when the alumni office started talking to me about a session like this, I said, let's make sure to do one on crossword puzzles. I've not published any crossword puzzles. I have published things on other types of puzzles, but I've not actually published any crosswords myself. But I am still, like I said, currently a big puzzle fan. I do crossword puzzles pretty much every day, and any other types of puzzles that I can find. I am a huge fan of them. I do them in the New York Times crossword puzzle section. I actually there's a section where you can do a competition with other people on their mini puzzles, which are often like a 5x5 grid. And I have people who log on and do that, and we try to compare our times. And I also enjoy listening to Will Shortz, and a number of you probably know about Will Shortz. He does He's the editor for the New York Times Crossword Puzzle, but he also does the Sunday Puzzle on NPR. And it's really fun to listen to that. I've never actually entered the contest to try to get to do any puzzles live with him. Maybe sometime I'll get around to doing that. But I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about some of the history about crossword puzzles. It seems pretty clear that crossword puzzles really started as an offshoot of this idea about a word square. A word square is a type of a puzzle that people were doing as far back as ancient times in whatever language they were using, where the goal was to create a puzzle, create a grid that was, say, a 5x5 grid that uses 5 different words reading the same across and down. So the goal was to be able to do that and to see how big they could make them. In fact, the first 6x6 square, English language square that was published came out in 1859 that somebody discovered. 7x7 in 1877. An 8x8 came out in 1884, and then the record for ones that had been identified here in the English language was a 9x9, and the first one of those was in 1897. So pre-computers, right? It's just people entering and trying to figure out words. People have been playing with the words and grids for quite some time, so it's been kind of the origin of some of this. Well, the first crossword puzzle to ever appear was this one. It came out in 1913 in the New York newspaper, the New York World. This is a paper that was published by Joseph Pulitzer. He was really wanting to increase the readership of the New York World, and so they started this this separate section that appeared on Sundays. It was called the fun section, and they would have puzzles and just different amusements in it. And the editor of that section, his name was Arthur Wynne, he was stuck coming up in a December issue in 1913. He had some extra space and he didn't have anything for it. And so he'd been playing around with like word squares and things like that. So he wanted to extend this into a different realm and start to use different words. And he had to figure out a way to kind of denote where you needed to put the letters. And so he came up with this idea of a diamond shape. He called it a word cross puzzle. This was in the fun section of the magazine, so he already gave the readers the first word, fun, and his instructions were to fill in the small squares with a word which agrees with the following definitions. And so he gave a whole list of definitions and things for people to look at. So one example was it was numbered as 1 through 32, and the clue was to govern. So 1 through 32, that meant you needed to start in square number 1, enter the first letter, and then go down to square number 32 to enter in the last letter. So you can see it's a 4-letter word where the second letter is U, and the clue was to govern. And when people figured out the answer was rule, they could enter that in to the puzzle. Now, obviously, this wasn't like what we know today. You've got a number 1 right there in the middle of that square and a 32 in the middle of the last square. It's hard to write those letters over top of those, but eventually the practice came to be to put little numbers in the corners. But for right now, for a little while in the 19-teens, we had puzzles that looked like this. So each week he would publish a new one of these. By the second week of the puzzle, an editor or a typesetter for the puzzle magazine actually mistakenly flipped the words word and cross and called it a crossword puzzle with a hyphen in it. And that stuck after that. So these became known as crosswords after that. People started to send in their ideas of puzzles. People started to want to share some of the ones that they had created. And he would start to receive these. He didn't like to get so many things in the mail. In fact, they became just too voluminous for him to even be able to answer everything and take care of all of it. It was overwhelming for him. But people really started to follow up also to make some complaints. So he just did all of the editing himself. There were typos in some of the puzzles. There were mistakes. There were repeats of words and things. And it just got to be a bit much for Arthur Wynne. But he stuck with it for a couple of years and continued with this, with people sending in stuff. And this kind of became the practice now in the New York Times, for example. The editor doesn't make the puzzles, but the editor receives them from other people, edits them, and then puts them up after they've gone through a process. So by the mid-1920s, crossword puzzles were really a huge fad in the United States and starting to spread across the world. By the mid-1920s, almost every single major newspaper in the United States had a crossword puzzle, with one notable exception. The New York Times did not have crossword puzzles. They did not want to lower themselves to a popular fad that was going to go out of style soon. So they held back and towed the line for a while. Here are a couple of cartoons that started to appear in the 1920s. You can see 1924 leaving and 1925 coming in here in that first puzzle. And the title of that, or in that cartoon, the first thing that you see at the top, it says "that guiltiest feeling." So people were concerned about wasting time with crossword puzzles. In fact, the New York Times started to post editorials and things that were putting people down for spending time on this frivolous activity of crossword puzzles. So this is one of the things that started to separate the New York Times from other magazines, other newspapers. The other cartoon that you see here, it's hard to read perhaps, but the doctor is answering the phone at 2 a.m. and he says, "Yes, Dr. Brown speaking, what is it?" And the voice says, "I want the name of a bodily disorder of 7 letters, of which the second letter must be N." So this is meant to kind of show that people were going crazy over crossword puzzles and trying to figure things out as much as they could. Libraries talked about how dictionaries were falling apart because of their overusage, people just pouring through dictionaries and other resource materials. And that was just really the way that people were approaching crossword puzzles. They were just really pretty crazy over them. Then the New York Times had a change of heart. So in 1941, after Pearl Harbor was bombed in December of 41, the Sunday editor of the New York Times went to the publisher. And by the way, the Sunday editor of the New York Times was someone who was doing other crossword puzzles from other newspapers on the side, and he was never really truthful with his boss, the publisher, to say that I'm actually doing crossword puzzles and I think we should have them. But he wrote after Pearl Harbor, he wrote to the publisher and said, "We ought to proceed with the puzzle, especially in view of the fact that it's possible there will now be bleak blackout hours. Or if not that, then certainly a need for relaxation of some kind or another." So it was after that that the New York Times started to publish crossword puzzles. It was a way to give a diversion to people who were overwhelmed with what they were hearing in the news. It was a way for people to get some relaxation of some kind. And so that was where things kind of got started. But the New York Times didn't want to jump into the fray with everybody else unless they could do it better. So the New York Times had kind of decided they wanted to set the standard for what would become crossword puzzles in the United States. So I want to bring now to you a mention about somebody who was really crucial at this point. Her name was Margaret Featherbridge. When she got married, she became Margaret Ferrar. She was working at the New York World back in 1923, and she was working to correct some of the crossword puzzles. You know, Wynne was overwhelmed with all these puzzles, and so they decided to hire someone to help him out. Now, she wasn't that interested in crossword puzzles. She thought they were kind of boring, and so she was doing some editing, but not real careful editing at first. And so finally, she picked up one and started to solve it, and she kind of got interested in it. So she decided she wanted to be a little bit more careful in the way that she would edit these puzzles. And so she started to set some standards for crossword puzzles there back at the World. She left in 1926 so that she could help to raise their family. And when the New York Times decided in February of 42 that they wanted to start to do crossword puzzles, start to publish them, they reached out to Margaret Ferrar. Why did they know to reach out to her? Well, she was on the side while she was raising a family. She was also working with Simon & Schuster publishers. They had decided one of their first books that Simon & Schuster wanted to put out was a crossword puzzle book. This was back in the 1920s. And they reached out to her to be the editor for their books. And so while she was at home raising the family, she was also editing these crosswords for the book that Simon & Schuster was putting out. The first book Simon & Schuster put out for crossword puzzles was a huge smash. It became a bestseller beyond belief. And so since that time in the 1920s, to today, Simon & Schuster has always had at least one crossword puzzle book in its catalog. They have continued to sell crossword puzzle books. It's been a staple for Simon & Schuster. So she had been doing that, and so the New York Times reached out to her and said, would you be our editor? And so she started to do that in 1942. And then she became the very first editor of the crossword puzzles in the New York Times. She continued all the way up until 1969 when she retired. Now, just to let you know, she retired because the New York Times had a policy in place that at a certain age, you had forced retirement. She hit that age, and so she had to retire. She wanted to continue even longer, but she decided to step down. She stepped down and went on from there. So there were a lot of industry standards that were set up by her in terms of what crossword puzzles should be. So she was pretty adamant from the very beginning that a crossword puzzle needed to have rotational symmetry of the black squares, 180-degree rotational symmetry. So if you take a look at this puzzle, you can see where the black squares appear in the puzzle. And if you take and, well, if you want to do this, if you want to stand on your head, turn it upside down or stand on your head and take, well, here, let me try this for you. If you actually take the grid and turn it 180 degrees and put it next to where it was before, you can see that the black squares are all in the exact same position. So there is 180-degree rotation of the black squares. There's symmetry here. Now, why does symmetry matter? Well, there are actually two good reasons for it. One is it is an aesthetic of the puzzle. It's something that they say it kind of draws the reader in. It's something that attracts you without you necessarily even knowing that that's happening. It is an aesthetic that makes the puzzle even more pleasing to the eye. So it really is something that we've discovered is an attractor for people to work on a crossword puzzle. So if you take a look at pretty much any standard crossword puzzle that you find anywhere, you'll see a rotational symmetry, typically a rotational symmetry of the black squares. Now, with any of these industry standards I'm going to share with you, there are always exceptions. Margaret Ferrar even let some exceptions go, but there's always a good reason why there's an exception. In fact, yesterday's puzzle in the New York Times, their Wednesday puzzle, actually did not have rotational symmetry of the black squares, but it had reflectional symmetry, left to right. And there was a reason, because of the design that the person who was creating the puzzle really wanted to show and to try to get a little bit of a theme across for that one. But typically, 98% of the time, you're going to see a puzzle that has rotational symmetry of the black squares. She also set a standard to say no words can be repeated in the grid. In the clues, yeah, that's fine. But in the grid itself, no repeats. So the very first puzzle that was published in the New York World, the first crossword puzzle, actually had 2 instances of the word dove appearing in that puzzle. And that was fine. That was the first one. But since then, Margaret Ferrar and everybody else has pretty much said no repeated words in a grid. So typically now we almost always have a square diagram. This was a change from those first crossword puzzles that were diamond shaped and they had a hole in the middle. And there were no black squares to say, don't put anything in here. So now we've got puzzles that have numbers in the corners, and we've got square diagrams. So typically, most puzzles now, the standard is a 15 by 15. In the New York Times, that's what you'll see Monday through Saturday, with an exception here or there. But they're typically 15 by 15. And then the larger puzzles, the Sunday puzzles, are 21 by 21. Now, what that typically does then is it sets us up for a nice uniformed structure that puzzles have. And there are certain types of grid designs then that become pretty consistent across puzzles. It also, because there's an odd number by an odd number, you will have a square that's exactly in the middle of the puzzle. Again, I think it's an aesthetic, but it's a typical thing that has been set up now for us. It's also come about now that all of the white squares have to be connected. So there have been times where puzzles have been created where a block of white squares might be separated from the rest of the puzzle, or there might be a left and a right side of the puzzle. That's not standard. That's not standard at all. Typically, the challenge is to create something that has that connectivity throughout the grid. I wanted to mention that I said earlier, there are 2 reasons why we have symmetry of the starting black squares. One reason, like I said, is for the aesthetic. The second reason, though, is as a challenge to the puzzle designer. So if the grid were just wide open, you can just put in squares wherever you want to. It's not that hard to create a crossword puzzle. It's harder when there's symmetry. And so what puzzle designers do is they create puzzles that have symmetry also as a challenge to the puzzle creator, him or herself. One of the things that Margaret Ferrar really put in place was the idea that there should not be black squares in no more than 1/6 of the entire grid. So they don't want the puzzle to be filled up too much with black squares. They like to have more open space, and sometimes there's a challenge to get as much open space as you possibly can in a puzzle. So that's kind of a standard. That rule is broken sometimes, but that's a pretty typical standard that we see. And finally, one of the things that Margaret Ferrar put in place was to have a progression of difficulty throughout the week. Her progression was this idea that you start easy on Monday and then you work your way up to Sunday with the hardest puzzle. When she was doing this, the puzzles didn't progress in difficulty that much, but in general they did. More recently, the puzzles have become more different from each other, from Monday through Saturday, especially with the Sunday puzzle being bigger and maybe not as hard as the Saturday puzzle, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. One other thing, another standard that Margaret Ferrar put in place was this idea about the Sunday breakfast test. So she wanted to make sure that there were no words or clues, that if you were sitting around the Sunday breakfast table with your family, that there was nothing that would be inappropriate for everybody in the family to hear or to see. So this was a standard for her that she kept in place. It's not always followed these days, but people often still talk about the Sunday breakfast test idea. All right, let's take a look at some of the puzzles. So earlier, I sent you, the Alumni Center sent you a packet. And in that packet, I had 10 puzzles. These are puzzles that I pulled out of the New York Times crossword puzzles. And I gave them to you kind of in an order. They go from Monday puzzles up through Thursday puzzles. So there are 3 Monday puzzles in there that I wanted to share with you just so you can see some examples. And many of you have had a chance to work on a lot of these, so I really super appreciate that. After this is done, the alumni office will send out all of the solutions. So I've got a packet that I've put together of all the solutions, and you'll receive that so you can go back and take a look at those things. By the way, looking at solutions is not cheating. I'll come back to that later. I don't mind if you look something up, or if you have to look at a solution from time to time, because that's how we learn. That's how we learn things. Anyway, so here's a puzzle that appeared back in 2016 by Howard Barkin. He's someone who's created a bunch of puzzles for the New York Times. Here's the grid. You can see the symmetry in the black squares. And then I thought I would throw up here real quickly the solution. So you can, if you've got your packet there, you can check some things out if you want. I was really interested in this puzzle grid. I thought it had some really neat ideas in it. But what I want to do right now is talk to you about themes that people use. So, you know, it's one thing just to create a puzzle. It's got symmetry. It's got some neat ideas, maybe some new words that haven't been used before. But it's another thing to create a puzzle that has a theme to it. So in the New York Times, their Monday through Thursday puzzles always have some kind of a theme. And then the Sunday puzzles almost always have a theme to them as well. The Friday and Saturday puzzles are just meant to be kind of advanced, not necessarily with a theme, but the other ones, they have a theme. So if you take a look at the long answers here in this puzzle at 17 across, where we've got Boulder Dam, at 31 across with Rock Lobster, at 48 across with Pebble Beach, and 65 across with Dust Jacket. So you can see this progression where the first word in each of those answers goes from boulder to rock to pebble to dust. And as you can see in 50 down, where the clue says eaten away, like the first words of these answers, the answer there is eroded. So the theme is, if you start off with a boulder and it gets eroded down to a rock, which gets eroded down to a pebble, and then further on down into dust. So to me, this is pretty cool. I like when I can take that puzzle an extra step and figure out what the theme is. Now, they try to help you figure out what the themes are pretty easily. They give you a lot of clues for that, but that's, to me, a cool part about doing these puzzles, is really looking for those themes and figuring out what they were doing there. Just a couple of other things about this puzzle. You'll notice at 10 across and 64 across, the word opal. appears first as a German car and then as a gem or a stone there for 64 across. I think that's kind of fun. You'll see puzzle designers doing things like that intentionally if they get the chance. And now in hindsight, it's kind of fun to also see 48 down. Some of you have noted already that that answer is a little bit out of date. The clue was former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. It says former. Well, in 2016, she was the former House Speaker, but that clue would need to be updated right now. But it's important for you to check the date of a puzzle if you want to figure out how it relates to when you are solving the puzzle. Second puzzle in your packet by Ned White. Here's the solution for this puzzle, and I was excited about this one. Being in the Cincinnati area, there's a really neat kind of connection here. If you take a look at these long answers, I believe there are 2, 4, 6, 8 of them. They're phrases like point guard, paint gun, pea green, and party girls. What's kind of fun about that is if you look at the very center, the Cincinnati company P&G that's related to there. It says a consumer products giant, or a hint to the answers in the 8 starred clues. So that's kind of fun, a way to kind of work that in. I thought this puzzle designer did a really nice job with that puzzle as well. All right, and our last Monday puzzle here, and I'm sorry if I'm giving away anything for you who have not solved these puzzles yet. If you want to just stop listening right now for a little bit, and then you can come back and see what the theme is on your own, but I'm still going to talk through this right now. So the solution here for this Monday puzzle, it appeared in 2020, so a couple of months ago, by Jacob Stolberg. This one was a little bit hard to figure out at first, and this is a rare puzzle where the theme appears vertically and not horizontally. Now, whenever somebody does that and they have a theme that appears vertically, there's always a reason. There's always a reason that they did that. And so if you look at 15 down, the clue was an activity that's depicted in a famous February 23rd, 1945 photograph, and in 3 of this puzzle's answers. So if you look at 15 down, you get that it does say that it's raising the flag, and so it's referencing the photo from Iwo Jima of American GIs raising the flag. But now to go back, it said that this is the word that appears here, that relates to that photograph, but it also appears 3 other times in the grid. And again, now this is why it's a vertical theme. If you take a look in some of these long answers, you'll find the word flag raising in 3 places in the puzzle here. So in the phrases dining al fresco, legal force, and King Alfred, you can find the word flag vertically going up. So I was pretty impressed with that. I thought that was a nice puzzle. The reason this ran as a Monday puzzle was because of the date. So this happened on the 75th anniversary, a day after. This was not enough for a Sunday puzzle, but for a Monday puzzle, they went ahead and did this one on the 75th anniversary of raising the flag at Iwo Jima. All right, so I wanted to take just a quick moment to go to a question that I got from one of the registrants earlier this week. Somebody said, I noticed that many of the same words will come up across multiple crosswords. Are they common because they fit in construction well, or is it a coincidence I keep seeing the same words, or is it some other reason entirely? So I thought I would take a quick look back at the first 2 puzzles in your packet. They both contain the word Oreo. I thought that was really interesting. So I'm going to click out of this. So I'm going to stop sharing this right now. I want to click on this link that I have where there's a blog where people keep track of all of the different words and phrases and things that are used in the New York Times crossword puzzles. And so in this blog, all right, there we go. This is in xwordinfo.com. Sorry, I'll send that link with the packet itself later. So what we have is an accounting since Will Shortz started editing the New York Times puzzle. This is the Shortz era. What are the most common 3-letter words, and how many times have they appeared? So the word era has appeared 595 times in puzzles in the New York Times. And you can see this kind of listing going on down. You go down to look at 5-letter words, 4-letter words, 5-letter words. You can see, for example, here's the word Oreo. It's appeared 319 times in puzzles. And when you get a good look at all these other words, what do you start to notice? What do you start to see? So a lot of people, when they first look at these, they see there are a lot of vowels here, and that is one reason why some of these kinds of words appear very, very frequently, and they're more common letters that you see. Like if you go on Wheel of Fortune, these are some of the letters that people are going to pick early on. Or if you play Scrabble, these are the 1-point tiles quite often. They're more common letters. They make it easier when you're doing crossword puzzles to fit a lot of these things in together. While I'm here, I do want to take a moment to click on the word Oreo. It's a live link. What it does here is it shows you what are the various clues that people have used to clue the word Oreo. All right, so when I do this, we'll do a quick search here. So chronologically, from the most recent to the oldest, these are the clues that people have been using for the New York Times crossword puzzles for the answer of Oreo. You'll see a cookie since 1912. That's appeared 4 times. Popular name for a black and white pet or a black pie crust component. The word Oreo, it's an interesting one because over time, the word Oreo has been popping up more and more frequently in the New York Times. It's been one that fits in well, but it's fun for people to come up with really good clues to clue it as well. In fact, you can see back in August of 19, someone clued it as the most common commercial name in the New York Times crosswords. So it's kind of self-referential, the fact that they used it there. So if we were doing this live, I would love to have packets of Oreos to pass out to everybody. So I apologize that I don't have that for you right now. Maybe we should have sent those out to people ahead of time. I'm not sure. So just to let you know, there are some really good resources for you to look at, common words and things to learn about when you want to do crossword puzzles, and how you can learn to do a better job with some of those things. All right. So what I want to do right now is we'll head back to the presentation. We'll jump into a few other things here, and we'll come back to some more puzzles in a few minutes. A little bit of history here, going across the pond. In 1924, there was a British op-ed that was published in a newspaper there that said that Americans were becoming enslaved by crossword puzzles. They were spending way too much time on crossword puzzles, and in the UK, they were pretty much above that. That didn't last long. They started to do crossword puzzles a lot too, but because of their wanting to be different from the United States and to do things better, they started to create something that became known as a cryptic crossword, where it's a little bit more elevated form of a crossword puzzle where there's a lot of wordplay. They'll use anagrams, homophones, hidden words, double definitions, all sorts of wordplay. And I had one of the people who was signing up for this webinar asked me to mention briefly about cryptic crosswords, and I'm happy to do so. Cryptic crosswords you can find in the US, you can find them in puzzle magazines, you can find them online, various places, but they take some getting used to. So a couple of examples here. One clue that you might find would be something like this. Ms. Reagan is upset by the executives. This is a clue that you would find in a cryptic crossword. Now, by the way, they always tell you what the breakdown of words in that answer is. So it's an 8-letter word for this answer. If it were a multiple word answer, they would have something like 2, 6 for a 2-letter word followed by a 6-letter word. But in this case, it is an 8-letter word. Now, with a cryptic crossword clue, the word is always referenced twice. One with a straight definition, and 2 with some sort of wordplay. Okay, so the straight up definition that they use in this one is actually the word executives. So another word for executives is the word managers. That's meant to be a synonym for executives. But the wordplay comes from upset. See where it says upset here? That's a reference back to the first 2 words, Ms. Reagan. If you take Ms. Reagan and anagram those letters, you can get the answer of managers. So it is an anagram with the straight up definition. Okay, kind of cool. All right, so another one that we have here is confront them in the tobacco store. It's a 6-letter answer. So I'll let you think about this for a minute. There is a straight up definition and there is some sort of a word play. In this case, it's actually a hidden word. So confront is the definition. You're looking for a synonym for confront, and the answer is accost. Where is it hidden? If you take a look at the last 4 letters of tobacco and the first 2 letters of store, embedded within the phrase tobacco store, you'll see the word accost. And that is clued by the idea about in the tobacco store. So confront them in the tobacco store. I'm kind of glad I don't have these every day in the New York Times, but they're still fun on occasion for me. Showed the answer too quick. Footwear for pack animals. This is a double definition. So footwear, mules is a type of footwear. Pack animals is another definition for mules. And finally, another puzzle that I have is to applause. It's left out of graduation ceremony. So here, this one's kind of fun. The straight up definition is graduation ceremony. So can you come up with another word that's 7 letters long that means graduation ceremony? So the answer is a capping. So where does that come from? Well, you take the idea about applause, that is clapping. Left out means take the letter L for left, take it out of clapping, and you get the word capping. So if you're interested in these kind of cryptic crosswords, look for them. They're kind of fun to play with. They take some getting used to. I kind of have to change my mindset when I work on a cryptic crossword because it's not a straight up clue. However, in the UK, this is the epitome of crossword puzzles. So the UK at this time in Great Britain, et cetera, they were saying that crossword puzzle solving was a waste of time. It was actually equivalent to lost productivity in the United States. And so they were really looking down their noses at the US. Well, back at the New York Times, we'll kind of progress for a little while here. When Margaret Ferrar stepped down, Will Wang became the crossword puzzle editor. Now, he reigned from 69 to 77. He liked to introduce some new ideas. In fact, some people reference him as the master of the dad joke, which I appreciate. I really do. So a clue that he might use for removed a chicken part, the answer that he referenced for this was delivered. Delivered, removed the chicken part. So a friend of his referenced Will Wang at one point. He said, if you were of a certain age, or if you were a cultural snob, or if you were raised in or around New York City, or ideally all 3 of those things, then Molesca, I'm sorry, we're talking about Will Wang. The next guy, I'll talk about him in a second. Will Wang was a master of all of this. Will Wang was the one who did all the puns, but Eugene Molesca is the guy who said, if you were a good friend, if you were of a certain age or a cultural snob, or you were raised around New York City, then Molesca was your hero. So Molesca was someone who wanted to move back to more traditionalist crossword puzzle words. So Molesca was a guy who really took the New York Times back to its old days. He got rid of Will Wang's puns and plays of words so much. What he really wanted to do was to make puzzles very traditionalist, very elitist. This is what Eugene Molesca did. So he was a guy who took puzzles and made them kind of an elite activity for people. And that kind of put a lot of people off. Didn't make people very, very happy. So it's not surprising that at this time in 93, in 1977 all the way up to 93, a puzzle magazine came out in the US. It was Games Puzzle Magazine. As I referenced earlier, this is something that got me interested in puzzles when I was a kid. This was kind of the new guard of puzzle creators who really came to Games Magazine. Games was a place where people could try new puzzle ideas, try new types of puzzles, ways that people could just experiment with new things. And this was something that got me really excited when I was in middle school to look at some puzzles this way. A lot of people started to involve pop references, pop cultural references, different ways that you could fill in grid squares. For example, this is where I first saw a crossword puzzle where each of the words for a color was actually, you had to shade in that square with that color. So if it was red, you could shade it in red or write the word red in like a rebus puzzle or something. But this is the first place I ever seen anything like that. And it blew my mind that you could do something like that in a crossword puzzle. I thought that was really awesome. One of the things I do want to also let you know is there's something that's referenced now as the Oreo Wars with crossword puzzles. So at this time, Eugene Molesca refused to use the word Oreo in crossword puzzles unless the clue was mountain, prefix. So the prefix for the word mountain, another way to reference that is the word Oreo. Because there was a kind of an unwritten rule that you did not use any commercial names in the New York Times crossword puzzles. Well, in Games Magazine, they blew that out of the water, and people started to create puzzles that had more cross references to pop cultural ideas, that would have more puzzles that were about current events and things. And I thought that was really pretty cool. Some of the names that people started to notice that would appear in Games Magazine, puzzle creators like Merle Regal, Emily Cox, Henry Rathven, and of course, this is where Will Shortz then came into play. Will Shortz was the guy who became the first editor of the New York Times crossword, or the next editor of the New York Times crossword puzzle. He was the first editor of Games Magazine. So let's go back to some of your puzzles here. Let's take a quick look here at your Tuesday puzzles. So now the puzzles are getting a little bit more difficult, maybe even have a little bit more cleverness to how some of these things are set up. So the first Tuesday puzzle here by Mark McLaughlin. Here's the fill for the puzzle, if you want to take a look at that. And I was really quite surprised when I started to see so many instances of it talking about the same clue, this, comma, on the periodic table. You see that in number 10 across. You see it number 18 across, right, with argon, this on a periodic table. It turns out what you get are 5 different elements here in the crossword puzzle. So I thought that was pretty cool. But then he takes it a step further. And if you take a look at 38 down and 43 down, 43 down shows you that each of these is an element in the periodic table. And 38 down takes it even a step further and says, oh, by the way, each of these is not just an element, each of these is a noble gas in the periodic table. So if you look at the periodic table in the far right-hand column, you'll see helium, you'll see neon, you'll see argon, krypton, and xenon in that column of noble gases. All right, so that's it. No, it's not. There's one more step. If you take a look at 67 across, the very last clue in the puzzle says what this refers to in this puzzle's theme, in the abbreviation. So what do those things refer to? They refer to the atomic number of each of those things. So not only does helium show up in the puzzle, it shows up in column led by number 2. The atomic number for helium is 2 in the periodic table. Neon's atomic number is 10, and he got it to appear with clue number 10 in the puzzle. That's just ridiculous how cool that is, to be thinking so far ahead. You got to have these appear in the right places in the grids with the right numbers on them to have them all correspond. I just thought this puzzle was incredibly clever. So, all right, another favorite idea of mine that I've seen in crossword puzzles appears in the next Tuesday puzzle. This one's by Robert Cirillo. In this puzzle, he kind of does a fill here with 2 instances of some long words, but even better than that, as he says in the very first clue on number 1 across, the start of a recuperative word ladder. And it ends at 73 across. So if you take a look at these ones that are all clued as part of the word ladder, you get sick, silk, silt, wilt, welt, and well. And that's pretty cool. A word ladder is a progression of words where you change one letter at a time. So here's another instance of another type of wordplay appearing in a crossword puzzle. And you go from sick to well. So that's the recuperation that's mentioned here. And by the way, the 2 long answers that run horizontally across the puzzle, number 30 across, how to avoid becoming 1 across, sick, is an apple a day. And then, of course, with the last one, number 49 across, it says an aid for getting 73 across, well, that would be chicken soup. So I love how people are able to kind of incorporate all sorts of different ideas into these puzzles. The last Tuesday puzzle that I sent out to you here is one that I'm particularly fond of with regards to another wordplay, which is anagrams. So here's the fill for the puzzle. And I thought that the long ones, 20, 27, and 44, were hard to come up with because they just reference a brief headline with a year. And by the way, when you see a question mark at the end of a clue like that, that's meant that there's some sort of a play on words or something that's going on here. It's meant to give you an indication that there's something more to this puzzle. All right, so if you take a look at the last long one, though, 52, the clue that's given for 52 is a secretive classroom activity, passing notes. I remember that when I was a middle school math teacher, finding kids passing notes. All right, so in 52 across, the secretive classroom activity, or it's what those other ones are examples of. Those other long ones are examples of. So you get Monroe, no more, Newton went on, and Edison is done. So what it references are the death notices of Monroe, Newton, and Edison in the years that they passed away, with the second half being an anagram of the person's name. Take the letters of Monroe and you can get the words no more. You take the letters of Newton, you can get the rearrange them, you get went on, and Edison rearranged and you get is done. I just thought that was incredibly clever. I'm in awe of some of these people. Pamela Clawiter, awesome, great job on that. So from a registrant, how does one go about creating a crossword puzzle? Do you have any advice? So for me, the big things that I like to keep in mind with creating a crossword puzzle, and by the way, I've never published one, but I've tried to create some. Keep in mind the symmetry is really cool. The theme is important for it to have any legs, and the clues need to be interesting. The clues really, really do need to be interesting. So there are a lot of places you can go. I mentioned this website earlier, xwordinfo.com. There's a section of it that has tools for constructors, and they give you ways that you can come up with other types of clues for a word, or if you need to find a word that has an L as the second letter, it's a 5-letter word, and an R as the last letter, it can give you a listing of all the words that you could possibly use for that. So there are lots of tools that are out there on the internet for you if you're wanting to create some crossword puzzles, for you to get some assistance with doing this. I encourage you to go check that out if you want to create some crossword puzzles. All right, so this gets us up to Will Shortz. Will Shortz became the editor of the New York Times Crossword Puzzles in '93. He had come from Games Magazine and moved on over to the New York Times. It's no surprise that Will wanted to bring kind of a new style to the New York Times Crossword Puzzles. So he started to use some of these commercial names. He started to have more kind of play on words, like what Will Wang had been doing. He really got the New York Times to where it is, and he took that idea about an increase in difficulty over the week even further. So the Monday clues that we get now, the Monday puzzles we get now, are kind of easier than they had been when Ferrar was in charge of the New York Times. But the Saturday puzzles are harder than they were. So we get this really great increase, this great slope of difficulty for puzzles from Monday to Saturday. Sunday puzzles are now even more fun. They typically have some really fun and interesting themes. They're bigger, 21 by 21. But they also are not as difficult. Like I said earlier, they're about a Thursday level of difficulty, but they're just bigger and more challenging in that way. Will Shortz, many of you may know, he is a graduate of Indiana University, graduated there in 1974. He got his degree in a program called Individualized Majors. So it's kind of like Miami's Western program. And his degree, he decided, would be in enigmatology, the first person ever to get a college degree in enigmatology, which is the idea about puzzles. He grew up really loving puzzles and he wanted to study them in more depth. So like I said, he got the progression more updated in the New York Times. And he's also, since then, he's not developed, but he's introduced a lot of new puzzle types to the New York Times. You can see Sudoku puzzles. You can see other types of puzzles that he has really championed, Ken puzzles, etc. They now appear in the New York Times. And he's been a big proponent of all types of puzzles. He's also the coordinator for the New York Times or the American Crossword Puzzle Tournament. So as nervous as you might be solving crossword puzzles in front of people, how about doing it on a giant grid in front of an audience? Okay, this crossword puzzle tournament began in 1978. And the number of contestants has increased every year. Back in 2019, the number of contestants was 741. They've had to cancel this fall's contest for the first time in 2020, but they're looking for it to grow again and be even more popular. This is This is a tournament that was featured in the documentary Wordplay, and some of you have mentioned that you really enjoyed this documentary. It came out in 2006. It's the documentary that talks about crossword puzzle enthusiasts, and so it interviews Will Shortz. You got people at the puzzle tournament doing stuff, and people just really excited about puzzles all over the place. So I encourage you, if you're interested in that, to take a look at that documentary. One of the other things that's featured in the documentary is Will Shortz's favorite puzzle of all time. So it's something that's referenced as a Schrodinger puzzle, and this is one that predicted the next president. It appeared on Election Day in 1996. As I said, this is Will Shortz's favorite puzzle. When you fill this thing out, you can get this answer of Clinton elected. And again, this is the puzzle that appeared on Tuesday of the election. So this is a puzzle that predicted that Clinton was actually going to win the presidency that year. But what's cool about this that makes it a Schrodinger puzzle is that there are actually two different correct answers. If Bob Dole had won, this answer was also correct to the puzzle. So what's really cool about this, if you take a look at these down clues, like number 39 going down, the puzzle that's clued here says a black Halloween animal. If Bob Dole had won, you could answer this as a bat. But if Clinton was going to win, you could enter that answer of cat and still be correct. So this puzzle actually has two completely different correct answers, and either one would have been correct with the lead story in the next day's paper, Clinton elected or Bob Dole elected. I just think that is awesome. So to date, there have been 12 Schrodinger-type puzzles that have appeared in the New York Times, and I think that that's pretty impressive. People love to come up with all of these kinds of things. All right, so let's take a look at our Wednesday puzzles. The first Wednesday puzzle was created by someone who also created a Schrodinger puzzle, Andrew Reynolds. There's a puzzle that he did where it talked about flipping a coin. You could have an H or a T in certain circled letters on the grid, and either heads or tails would have been correct, and the puzzle would have worked out either way that way. But this is one that Andrew Reynolds did back in 2016. Here's a solution with the middle answer of climate change referenced here. Climate change, if you take a look at the the gray squares that are highlighted across the grid, if you took the word climate and anagrammed those letters, you would get the letters that you see, the sequence of letters in each of these answers. So it's pretty cool that you could take the phrase chemical testing or meal ticket or direct mail. Each of these long answers, you've got that string of letters, of 7 letters of the word climate, rearranged in different ways. And not only did he do that, but if you look, he actually got rotational symmetry of where those gray squares appear. If you flip the grid upside down, those gray squares will also appear in the same places. I just think that's pretty impressive. It's really cool. Andrew Reynolds, by the way, he has published 5 times in the New York Times, all the way from 2012 to 2016, and it kind of gives you a rundown of his publications. But the reason I'm highlighting him is he is also a Miami University graduate. He graduated in class of 2010. Giving him a big shout out here. There was an issue of the Miamian magazine back a few years where he was highlighted. So if you want to take a look at that, you can find out some more information about Andrew Reynolds. So I wanted to include a Miamian in this. Our other Wednesday puzzle here by David Kwong, he included a puzzle where he had some letters circled. I really love this one. This one is so incredibly clever. You fill this one in. Here's the fill that we get here. And it's really interesting. You get some circled letters. There's a GA and a GA. Then you get a God and you get IVA. And it's really interesting. But if you take a look at the clues for 8 and 63 across, what some performers saw in Las Vegas, with a question mark, so that means that there's kind of a pun or a play on words here, or a hint of this puzzle's theme. What it says is what some performers saw, lady in half. They saw a ladies being sawed in half. So if you look at the circled letters, you've got GA, that's Lady Gaga, separated in half. You've got Lady Godiva next, Godiva, Lady Godiva, sawed in half. You got Jane Grey, and then you've got Lady Chatterley. So all of these are ladies who've been sawed in half and split to different sides of the grid. And I also love that he did this in a progression with 4 letters, 6 letters, 8 letters, and 10 letters. Again, people are clever when they're being given a chance like this. I am running out of time. I've hit the 1 hour mark, and I completely understand if you need to step out. I'm going to quickly go through some of the other puzzles and also see if people have some questions that they'd like to have answered. I'm going to skip ahead for a little bit here. Why do people do crossword puzzles? Crossword puzzles do provide us with a lot of really good benefits. People have asked a lot about, do they help us to improve our memory or cognition? Well, the idea here really is that crossword puzzles can help to keep our mind active a lot, but they do not increase the cognition that we have. They can help us practice some things. They can help us practice some ideas, but because we might just see a word for once, we don't necessarily learn that word. We don't get new cognition, new ideas here. So the idea about a crossword puzzle is that it's great practice for us to keep our minds sharp, but don't think it's going to stave off any of the effects of Alzheimer's or something like that. It is a great activity. There is nothing wrong with doing it, but we just don't learn new words. They can just help to keep us fresh. If you're someone who is doing crossword puzzles, you're someone who's probably already thinking about how you need to be very careful about how we progress in old age. And so this is something that I would encourage you to continue to do, but don't think it's going to solve everything for us. Crossword puzzles are great for problem solving. They help us to attack new things, look for new patterns and clues and things. I encourage you beyond belief to do crossword puzzles as part of a teamwork activity. Work with somebody else. I think you get an awful lot by bouncing ideas off of each other. It's a great activity, unless you're trying to compete, right? And then you want to get a faster time by yourself. For me, it's been great to learn some new ideas and to learn some new facts. I don't always remember them, but I do learn some new things when I'm working on crossword puzzles. I enjoy clues that tell you something new that you maybe never knew before about crosswords. For example, that one that talked about an Oreo being the most common commercial name used in the New York Times. If you didn't know that, now you did. It's a fun little trivia fact. Crossword puzzles, why do you do them? For creativity. It helps to expand your mind and to become more creative. People also say that it is a mood booster. So if you're kind of down and you need something to help us, just like we did World War II, right? It's something to help us boost our mood and to help us feel better. And it is something that does provide some stress relief. It can help you get your mind off of other things and provide some relief from some stress, excuse me. So finally, how do crossword puzzles remain relevant in the digital age? What I love about this idea is that there are puzzles that help us to stay up on current events, pop culture. Those are things that help us take a break, I think, from online content. If we're always being pestered and overwhelmed by things in the news, it's great to take a break from that and just to see what else is going on in your mind and to help to expand some things. I think it does provide you with some stress relief from what we have going on. So I would encourage you to do that and to get away from so much online content. However, I do also advocate for doing the New York Times online. This is something that I do all the time. I don't have a paper subscription to the New York Times. It's something that I do online. In fact, the New York Times crossword puzzles you can access it's under 20 bucks. It's $19.95 a year. You can get a subscription to the New York Times, just the New York Times crossword puzzles. And I like to do them online. I think it's an easy way for me to stop and come back to something that I'm really stuck on and trying to figure out. Real quickly, these last 2 puzzles I wanted to share with you just because I think that Jeff Chen is an excellent, excellent puzzle designer. His Thursday puzzle back in early February of 2016, was a little confusing to me when I first went through and filled this in because some stuff didn't really make sense. I thought, what is going on here? But being the math person that I am, I really appreciated this, that down in the lower left-hand corner at 62 and 65 across, it says at the top of the puzzle, the 4 long answers are affected by a literal interpretation of these shaded boxes. The shaded box is ROOT. It's a square root. And so the long answers where you see things like hole in 1, fantastic 2, on cloud 3, and sweet 4. Well, the first one's okay. 17 across, right? It says it's ace. That's a hole in one, okay? But 28 across, the clue is a Marvel Comics group. Now, Marvel Comics, I know. It's not the Fantastic Two, it's the Fantastic Four. However, the square root of 4 is 2. And on 45 across, that one, elated on cloud 3. I know the phrase is on cloud 9. Square root of 9 is 3. And the number 60 across, a milestone birthday is definitely not the sweet 4, but it is the sweet 16. Square root of 16 is 4. So I really love that puzzle. I think that's really great. And by the way, notice when this puzzle was published, the date was 2/4/16. Each of those are powers of 2, and that was not an accident. They did that way. So way to go, Jeff Chen. Finally, Jeff Chen combined with Jonathan K. I love these J names. I love that. I really do appreciate that as a Jeff myself. In this puzzle, well, first thing that caught me was the grid, and it has all these little L shapes. I prefer to think of them as J shapes, but they appear in the black squares throughout the grid. And in this one, it was really interesting because you've got a bunch of instances of the letter J. J does not occur that much in crossword puzzles, but we do get D major, Raja, Ajax, and Abject. I thought, oh, that's really pretty cool. We've got J's that appear in this puzzle. But where the J's appear in the horizontal answers are really strange. Ringing of the J, and by J or by crook, and B on tenter J's, and J line and sinker. Well, really what those are, it should say hook there, right? In each of those cases. So it's ringing off the hook, and by hook or by crook, or be on tenter hooks, and hook, line, and sinker. Well, what they've done is they've taken those letter J's, and when they're across, they interpret those as an actual hook. So I thought that was super, super clever in this puzzle. But that's typical for a Thursday puzzle that you'll see. Solving crossword puzzles, how do you do better? So my suggestions are, start with what you know. Fill in the blanks. Puzzles sometimes where they've got a blank in the clue itself, that's a great place to start because it draws your attention to it, and they're kind of easier sometimes. I advocate for taking a break from a puzzle, walking away and coming back to the puzzle. I also would say it's great to work with somebody else. Like I said before, work with somebody else. You can learn an awful lot from that other person. And like I said earlier, please look things up. It's fine. It's not cheating if you're learning from it, right? The next time you encounter that, maybe you'll know that idea another time, or you'll learn a way that people might be setting up their crossword puzzles. It's not cheating if you're learning. And finally, practice, practice, practice. Do them, practice them. You'll get a lot of experience this way, and this is how you get better. So there is a link also on how to solve New York Times crossword puzzles. There are a lot of really great bits of advice there on ways that you can learn and become better at any crossword puzzle. Some of the resources that I used here, I've got some books here, Thinking Inside the Box, The Curious History of the Crossword, and The History of the Crossword. And then these two websites I found to be incredibly helpful. This xwordinfo.com is brilliant. Jeff Chen, who I just referenced in those last two puzzles, he's the guy who put together that website, and he keeps it updated every day. And then the other one is rexworldpuzzle.blogspot.com. This is the blog by Rex Parker, and he does the crossword puzzle in the New York Times every day. And it's really fun to hear him. He kind of expounds on things. He complains if he doesn't like something, and he draws your attention back to other things. It's a great blog for you to learn about solving crossword puzzles. So I guess I will stop there. So Molly, I'll turn it back on over to you and see if there are maybe some questions that people sent in.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. Just want to be mindful of people's time and just remind the audience that they can view this webinar in its entirety later this afternoon if you need to leave us before it's concluded. But at this time, we wanted to take some time to answer a few questions that came in during the webinar. Let's see, the first one, which is one I always struggle with, pencil or pen?
It's up to you. It's up to you what you like. I'm definitely a pencil person. So as a math person, I know that a pencil is something that allows you to make mistakes, and you learn from your mistakes and you go from there. But you saw in that picture from the American Crossword Puzzle Tournament, they have to use pen, but they can scratch something out and put something next to it if they change their mind. I prefer a pencil. It's up to you. I really believe that we learn from our mistakes, and it's okay to make mistakes. And so, to me, a pencil is really good.
I like to hear that answer. I wouldn't dare use a pen. Next question comes from Benjamin. What was the crossword panic of 1944? Do you know? Can you answer any questions about that?
Yeah, I had a slide about that, and I went through it really quickly, passed over it. But basically, there were some puzzles that started to appear in some British newspapers, in a British newspaper, right before D-Day. And basically, in a bunch of these puzzles, there were some specific words that were a reference to the D-Day, some code words like Omaha, and other things as well. And it was just something that really caught people by surprise once they knew what was going on. And so there was kind of an investigation to see how was it? Was there a coincidence that these words that were really a big part of the D-Day invasion, that those words were also appearing in crossword puzzles in the month before D-Day? What people found out was that the guy who was making these puzzles was going to bars and stuff and talking to American soldiers who were already there on the ground and just talking to them. And every once in a while, they might happen to say these words. And he would say, oh, that's a good word. I haven't heard the word Omaha for a while. I'm going to put that in a puzzle. And so it was really people just sharing some words kind of where they probably shouldn't have been. And these puzzles started to include some of these words. And it was too much of a coincidence for it to actually be that way. So people found out it didn't botch anything up for the U.S. It all worked out just fine, I guess. But it didn't blow the cover for the D-Day invasion.
Excellent. That's interesting information. Let's see. This next question comes from Neil, and we're going to try to wrap this up soon in the interest of everyone's time again. But Neil says, when I first started doing crossword puzzles, I found that I would always think of, for example, a noun when the answer was actually a verb. He says it doesn't happen as often now, but still sometimes once he thinks of something, it's hard to overcome that in his brain. Do you have any recommendations or tips for sort of overcoming that tendency to get stuck?
Yeah. So in that last puzzle, for example, that I shared, in puzzle number 10, clue number 9 across, the clue is free, and the answer is rid. So if you're thinking it has to be a noun, but it might be a verb, if you're thinking it has to be a verb, but it ends up being a noun, I mean, it's really that flexibility that I was talking about earlier. You need to keep your mind maybe more flexible to say, when you first read a clue, think about what first comes to your mind, maybe a noun, right? Free, what's something that is free, no cost, whatever. But what actually comes out is here, if you free something, you might be rid of something. So it's this idea about being flexible. And so when I first look at a clue, I like to think about, is there more than one way that this would make some sense? Okay, so I challenge myself before I get started to think about multiple ways that this could happen. And like what the viewer said, you get better at it as you go along. You have to think about being really flexible in how you're approaching a puzzle. So it's just something that comes with practice, I would say.
Excellent. There's some good questions that are still coming in, and I want to keep answering them all. I just really want to be cautious of folks' time. I do have one question here. What crossword puzzle has a reputation for being the hardest and or longest lasting with regard to its publishing record?
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier about the puzzles in what is it, Schuster and Scholler? Is that right? So that puzzle book series is one of the longest lasting in book publication. Simon and Schuster book series. But what we also know is that the New York Times has the reputation for really being, in the U.S., the most difficult puzzles, the most challenging and the most interesting puzzles. To me, they are the ones, they do set the gold standard in the U.S. All other puzzles would love to be like the New York Times crossword puzzles. They are the ones that really set the standard. They're the ones that people aspire to publish in. When people publish in the New York Times, by the way, when somebody writes a puzzle for the New York Times, the rate that they get now is $500 for getting a puzzle in the New York Times. That's pretty cool. there are people who have published over 100 times in the New York Times crossword puzzles, and it's more for a Sunday puzzle, for example. So I would recommend that people, if you're thinking about doing something like that, really talk to other people who have engaged in doing this. They're really happy to help other people learn about putting puzzles in, how to create puzzles, etc. It seems like it's a really good way to kind of expand your mind a little bit. So I would recommend that.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Wanko. That's all the time we have for today. As a reminder, a recording of this presentation will be available on our website later today for you to go back and consume again if you'd like. Again, we'd like to thank you, Dr. Wanko, for leading our webinar today. Please be sure to look at our other online events we're presenting. You can see things to come as well as our archived webinars. And we certainly appreciate having you with us. Thanks again for joining us, and love and honor to you all.
Yeah.